Hello, everybody. Welcome. Today is World Password Day, and we're very pleased to be joined by Troy Hunt. Troy is an internationally renowned leader and in-demand speaker specializing in online security. He founded something you may have heard of, the Have I Been Pwned website in 2013, and is here to discuss the need for strong passwords and multi-factor authentication. By the way, Troy, I asked my three kids and my wife earlier today if they knew what pwned meant, and one of them did, but only one of the four. So we all have more work to do.
So just yesterday, I added this to the FAQs. I actually had someone submit a user voice idea. They said, could you please explain what pwned is? So, okay, I should actually do that. So, like 6.5 years on, I now have a definition there right on top of the FAQs.
Well, that's excellent. We're very excited to have you here today. So let's start off talking a little about the website you created back in 2013, the Have I Been Pwned website. Can you just talk a little bit about what it's for and what it does?
Well, it's a data breach aggregation service. So when there is a data breach and the data leaves the original custodian of it, I mean, let's take Adobe, for example. It was a big news one back in 2013. Data got taken, data got redistributed on the web. Have I Been Pwned aggregates that. So there's 400 something data breaches now sitting in one place. And if you want to understand where your exposure is, you go to the website, you put your email address in, and it says, well, yeah, you've been in this breach and this breach and this breach, and it lists each one. So you get to see just how pwned you've been.
So does the database just list the email addresses or usernames, or are the passwords and credentials in the data as well?
So the only thing that's stored when you do that search is the email address, or rather the email address is already stored and then you do a search for it. The original data breaches often have much more extensive personal information. So for example, things like your home address or your phone number. That doesn't get loaded in the system. Instead, what I do for each data breach is I indicate the metadata, via metadata rather, what was actually exposed. So it'll tell you, for example, that in the Adobe breach, my password was in there. I was in Adobe twice. Thank you very much, Adobe. So it'll tell me that the password was included in the Adobe breach, but it doesn't store the password in Have I Been Pwned. There's a totally separate part of the system that only has passwords without any association to users at all. And that service is designed for people to see if a password has been compromised. And it's also used by companies to stop people from using passwords on their service, which has previously been in a data breach.
Cool. So I've got my own answer to this. I'm curious what you think. I'd say, in my view, and maybe because it affected me, the most consequential data breach of all time was the Office of Management and Budget security clearance data breach in the United States, because it was millions upon millions of people, and some of the most sensitive data out there was contained in it. What would you say the most egregious or worst breach was?
I thought you were going to say Ashley Madison, and then we're going to have an awkward discussion about how it impacted you. Uh, but I would say Ashley Madison, and the reason for that is that there's well over 30 million accounts there. So in terms of scale, it's very big. It's extremely sensitive information. So that's an important point as well. And then in terms of impact, this was an incident that led to multiple suicides. You don't often see a data breach that leads to death, and I suspect even OPM didn't ultimately lead to death, as sensitive as the other data was. The other thing is OPM was just constrained to the US. It was a lot of people, but it was one country. Ashley Madison spread across the whole world. It led to the outing of the CEO. It also led to the outing of a whole bunch of very personal internal communication in the company, as well as their entire code base too. So in terms of sort of real world global impact, I think Ashley Madison is sort of head and shoulders out there above everything else at the moment.
Good point. So do ordinary people need to be concerned about these data breaches and checking your Have I Been Pwned website to see if their email address has been uncovered in a breach?
Well, I think in simple terms, if you have accounts online, yeah, which is ordinary people. And look, in that regard, I'm an ordinary person as well. I've probably got more accounts than most people, but my data has been disclosed in things like Dropbox. Now, Dropbox is a very normal, everyday service. It's got some number of hundreds of millions of users these days. So yes, that is something that should concern your average everyday person. And the thing is, like, it goes well beyond just online services you use as well. So my data was also in the Australian Red Cross Blood Service data breach. Now, I never entered that data into a computer. We had the blood van come around to work one day, and a few of us went, yeah, we should donate blood. This would be a good idea. And we sat there with literally pencils on paper, filling in the form, donated the blood. That's the end of that story. And then it turns up in a data breach, because a lot of things that we create, even outside of the online world, do end up getting digitized, and then they end up online.
So your advice to people would be, you know, even if you haven't seen your name in a data breach, you didn't have an account with Adobe, you never got a security clearance from the US government, you didn't have a Yahoo account, that it's still very important to check the database, have I been pwned, to see if there was a compromise somewhere that might have had information on you, even if you never had an online account associated with that breach.
The reality of it is, if you have the capability to go and check it online, you have data online somewhere or other anyway. So look, I think it's a good thing for everyone to do, with my obvious bias. And it's not just about checking the account. There's a little box you can tick and say, okay, let me know in future if I appear in a data breach. And there's 3 million something people that are subscribed to the service. So you can go and check it once, and then if you appear somewhere later on, and I'm sure we all will. I mean, look, I am in a data breach that I'm yet to load. I just haven't yet figured out how to attribute the data breach. So there are future incidents yet to come that will impact all of us. So knowing about it in the future is very important as well.
So how many credentials, or at least the user identifier email address part of a credential, do you have in the database?
Good question. I have an exact number on the front of the website. So it's changing pretty much on a daily basis. So at the moment, it's around about 9.6 billion accounts. Now, an account is the occurrence of an email address in a data breach. So of that 9.6 billion, about 20 of them are mine, like mine personally, because I've been in Dropbox and Adobe and Plex and things like that.
That's fascinating. One of the things I noticed in my prior operational career was it seemed to be a point in time when there was a movement pretty heavily from the attacker side, from using automated password attacks, dictionary attacks, to using credential stuffing, and looking at these large aggregations of stolen credentials that hunted primarily for reused passwords. When did you see that change? If you saw that change, when do you think that sort of happened?
Look, I think credential stuffing took a real significant upturn probably about 2 years ago, around the 2018 timeframe. And just for clarity for everyone as well, we're just talking about lists of email address and password pairs, often aggregated from multiple different sources, and then used as a reference point to check whether an account exists on a website. So imagine you've got a list like literally of 1 billion email address and password pairs, and then you go to some online asset, say Spotify. Spotify gets hit all the time. And you have a script, and you just go, okay, take the first email address and password, check if it works on Spotify. Yes, okay, put it in the list of successful accounts. No, move on to the next one. And you just do this like 1 billion times over. And it's very, very highly automated, and can be very difficult to stop. Now, I saw particularly around the beginning of 2019, there was a breach I loaded in the beginning of 2019, which I titled Collection 1, which was a collection of email address and password pairs, a credential stuffing list, 773 million records in there, including mine again. And this is 773 million unique email addresses. If we look at the unique combinations of email address and password pairs, it was over 1 billion. And then later on, we discovered collections 2 and 3 and 4. So it's just, it is an unfathomably large amount of data that is out there, and it gets heavily automated and used to break into people's accounts and other services.
So for the people we've got listening that are more normal users, tell them how this could come back to bite them if they reuse passwords.
Well, if you reuse passwords, you only need to have a compromise on one of the places you use that password, and now someone has the credentials to get into all the other places. So let's take a sample, like say let's say LinkedIn. Okay, LinkedIn's a very popular service. If you used your LinkedIn password on let's say Netflix, and LinkedIn has a compromise, which it has had a compromise, very large number of accounts taken out. Now someone has your username and your password from the LinkedIn data breach. Now they have what they need to log into your Netflix account. And we see this all the time. If you go to like Twitter and just do a search for Netflix hacked, you have people the entire time saying, oh, my Netflix account has been hacked. And you sort of look at it and you go, has Netflix been hacked, or did you just make a really bad decision with your passwords? And we see big companies in the news the whole time because they suddenly become the target of these attacks. So Netflix certainly appears quite a lot. I mentioned Spotify before. We've seen Disney Plus in the news a lot recently. We've also seen things like Nest, the doorbell. People literally breaking into other people's doorbells due to credential reuse. And it feels like at the moment, not a week goes by where there's not some really big brand name in the news as the target of a credential stuffing attack.
So we're giving users lots of advice, that they need to have 30-character passwords, random combinations of digits, numbers, capital letters stuck together, and some special characters along the way. And then they need to change them every 30 to 60 to 90 days. At least that's the historic advice everyone's been given, which fortunately is now starting to go to the wayside to more actually usable advice. Because I think that advice actually leads to password reuse pretty regularly. What advice do you give people about selecting and storing and creating passwords?
Well, there's sort of if we look at the first bit, we say, okay, well, what makes a password strong? I think you touched on an interesting point there, which is that advice is changing over time. And if you think back to sort of the origins of how we had passwords, so when I used to be able to travel, I'd do this talk, right? And this talk was like the history of passwords, and it sort of starts back in MIT in the 60s, which was believed to be the first use case of a password on a computer system. And you sort of look at it and you go, okay, what did we have to worry about there? So you had to go into a room. When you imagine a computer in the 60s, right? The entire room was computer. So you had to go into a room, so you needed physical access. You had to be sophisticated enough to know how to use it. And then there are a very small number of people who could actually get in there and know how it works. So in terms of who you needed to protect your password from, it was very simple. And then as time goes by, you get a couple of decades down the line, and now we're getting computers in homes with remote access to things. So instead of like a few dozen people who might access a computer system, you end up with tens of thousands. And then you go another 20 years down the line, and now we're into sort of the noughties era, and everything's getting digitized, everything's online. We ultimately end up with billions of people with access to the internet. And what's happened is the way we viewed passwords has changed. So you go back about 20 years ago in particular, and one of the beliefs around passwords was that what makes a strong password is you got to have a mix of characters. You got to have uppercase and lowercase and numbers and symbols. And that the simple thinking about this is mathematical, so that the more types of character we have, the greater number of possibilities. And then if you can make it longer as well, even more possibilities, therefore the password is stronger. And the problem we have with this is that it assumes that humans are going to randomize their passwords and evenly distribute them across the spectrum of characters. In reality, humans are going to do things that make their life easier. So they're going to pick the name of the website, and they're going to use that as the password. Or they're going to get their kid's name and they're going to reuse it absolutely everywhere because this makes it easier. And then on these arbitrary composition rules, things like you got to have an uppercase character. So again, when I used to travel, I'd do this talk and I'd say, okay, let's imagine you want to have like some terrible lowercase 6-character password, and the website says you got to have an uppercase character. What do you do? And no matter where I went in the world, everyone would be like, oh, you just capitalize the first letter. Do you really think this works very well if everybody knows this? Like, you reckon the hackers haven't figured this out? So arbitrary complexity criteria leads us to very predictable results. And then you mentioned rotation as well. So the traditional thinking was we should mandate rotation. So that every 90 days, for example, you say, okay, you've got to change the password, because if a hacker got it and you change it, then they no longer have it. So when I do the talk, I'd say, okay, what are you going to do every 90 days? And they're like, well, we just increase the number at the end. So, well, if everybody knows this, do you really think it works very well? So one of the big shifts we've had, particularly over the last 5 years, is the recognition that passwords are very much a human problem, and that humans have these very predictable, very fallible patterns that they follow, and that we need to try and help people get away from that. Now, the best model we have today is to use a password manager. So I have a password manager where every single time I create an account online, and particularly at the moment, there must be loads of people creating accounts online because we're all just buying stuff online. And every single time you buy something online, you got to go to a different website because they've got the blanket or the t-shirt or whatever it is you want to buy, and you got to create a new account. So what are you going to do? If you reuse the password, we're back in this problem. If you use a password you can remember, is it actually going to be unique? Because we've got so many different passwords and so many different accounts. So the password manager generates it. And you would say, for example, generate me 30 random characters, use uppercase and lowercase and symbols and numbers. Store it in the password manager, and then you have a way of protecting that password manager to make sure that it's only you who gets into it. And there's another rabbit hole we can delve down about protecting the password manager.
So there are ways to do this much more simply. It's World Password Day. If you could give just a few pieces of advice to all of the billions of ordinary citizens out there, by your count, about what is an average of 2 per person in the world, that you've got records in the Have I Been Pwned database. And for those people online, of course, it's significantly more than that. What would you tell them? What are the few things that they really ought to do?
Well, number one, get the password manager. And if you don't get a digital password manager, like literally go and get something like a book and write unique passwords in there. But uniqueness of the password is the valuable thing. Work out the mechanism that works best for you to get uniqueness. Two-factor authentication is another great one. So with two-factor authentication, if someone does get your password, they don't get into the account. Now, two-factor might be receiving an SMS on your mobile phone. A lot of people decry the effectiveness of SMS because sometimes you get SIM cards that are hijacked, etc. But two-factor is always better than one-factor, even if it's weak two-factor. Or many people probably use a soft token like Google Authenticator or Authy. So that's extremely valuable too. And then there's all the other sort of everyday best practices around things like make sure that your software is up to date. We get security fixes the entire time because software has bugs. Avoiding phishing attacks. We see so much phishing at the moment, particularly in this COVID-19 era when there's a real desire for more information. The number of emails we've seen which allegedly have information about the pandemic. Open this up and you'll get like the one secret cure, or you'll see what the infection rate is in your area. So being really, really extra conscious about stuff like that at the moment as well is particularly important.
Well, great, Troy. Thank you very much. To hear that your advice is not that different from mine. I did one of these podcasts a week or so ago, and I said, write your passwords down. If you don't have a password manager, I don't care what it's in, lock it in a desk drawer. You're going to be much safer. So all of the old advice about Post-it notes. Well, you don't want it on a Post-it note. It's hard for most hackers to get access to paper in your home, and so the threat model is really different. The password manager's great advice for everyone. Really thank you for your time today, and good luck with the site. Really appreciated talking with you.
Cheers, Phil. Thanks, mate.